Hi, I'm Stephen, and I'm the Suffolk Craftsman. My YouTube channel is all about making stuff, and at the moment what we're doing is we're making a guitar. This is a Coban LP, Les Paul copy. I think their reference is LP711. There's two videos preceding this. One is an unboxing, just basically going through everything that was in the kit, and the second one was a dry build, where we identified a couple of little issues which needed attention before we went on to finishing the guitar. The main things were that the nut was way too high, and so we've taken a bit off the back of that. We'll do a final fit as we put the guitar together for a final time. I also decided that the plastic covers which were supplied with the kit for the back of the body and the pick guard were really not of the sort of quality which I wanted to fit on a final build. They fitted and everything, but just not really good enough. We need to do a bit of fret polishing, which I haven't touched yet, but we'll do that as the final part of the job when we actually put the neck on the body. But otherwise, we were very happy with it. Now, I've thrown back and forth a few ideas about how we're going to finish this, and originally I was going to French polish the face and varnish the back. I decided to French polish the whole thing. I've done it in two stages. I've already started the French polishing, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. First thing is, though, that the standard blonde mahogany which we've got, which the neck and the body were made from, which you can also see on the insides of these routings here, was a bit lighter than I wanted it to be. So the first thing I did was sand down all of the back, and then I mixed up a little bit of this Coban wood dye. This is deep mahogany wood dye. I mixed it up with water. It's a water-based stain, and I diluted it quite a lot, probably about 5 to 1, to make a very, very light coloured, very watery stain. And the first time you put that on, it will highlight any glue marks or anything like that which you haven't caught in the sanding. I did that, there weren't any, so I built up about 10 layers of stain to get it to the colour I wanted it to be. It's quite easy to see what colour it's going to be, because when you put it on wet, that's more or less what it will look like when it's got its clear coat over the top. So I built up that colour to the point where I was happy that it was as dark as I wanted it to be. Let it dry. Because it's a water-based stain, it makes the grain stand up at that point, and so you have to sand it, and that was the next thing I did. So I took some 400 wet and dry, and I sanded it dry, just to take off all the grain that had stood up from wetting the wood. I was in two minds at that stage as to whether or not to apply more stain, because inevitably when you sand, you rub through some places and not others. But I actually decided the where it had rubbed through, which is really on the edges, and I'll try and show you that on here, where it would rub through on these edges here, and maybe a little bit here and here. I decided I actually quite like it. It gave a kind of nice aged look to the wood, a little bit of distressing, if you like. So I didn't put any more stain on it, and I went straight on to French polishing it. I also sanded the neck to the same grade. I hadn't stained that at all. This is still natural. And then I went on with the French polishing. Now, French polishing is a process of building up layers of shellac. I tend to mix my own shellac. This is blonde de-waxed shellac flakes, like that. And you take, you weigh out about, in this case I mixed a quarter of a litre, 250 mils, so 250 mils of methylated spirits. I use the standard dyed purple methylated spirits, and about 65 grams of shellac flakes. This is Jack, by the way, who wants to be in the video. Say hi. I don't want to. Mix it up in a jam jar, leave it to dissolve overnight, and you end up with this stuff. It should stay dissolved. It will keep for some significant time. If it starts to thicken up because the meths is evaporating, you just add a bit more meths and then carry on. And then again. Application of it is really straightforward. You'll need to make yourself a pad, and I keep it in a bag because if you let the air get to it, it dries out. You make a pad like this. It's got some cotton wool balls inside an old piece of cotton cloth, and you need to apply that directly to the wood. The application process is really straightforward. I'm going to decant a little like that. You'll see this done lots of different ways. People will tell you there's right ways and wrong ways, and oh, you mustn't do it that way, whatever. But this is the way I do it. All of this has had a few coats. You tend to put on like 4 or 5, maybe 6 coats in a session, continually working it like wet on wet or wet on sticky maybe, to build up the thickness. Each time you apply a coat, you add an extra layer of shellac to the surface that's already there, and because it's a solvent with meths, the layer you put on dissolves the layer underneath it slightly, it bonds to it, the meths evaporates, and you end up with this hard shellac coating. Inevitably, and I didn't do any grain filling with this because I actually wanted a bit of the texture of the grain to come through, but inevitably when you do, you get a bit of a surface topography going, because it sinks into the pores in some places and it sits on top of the grain in other places. So you end up building up what is an ever increasing topography on the surface, and then basically it gets rougher and rougher the more you put on. So there's 2 ways of dealing with that. One is you can burnish it. You can do that by, as you put your last coats of shellac on, you can put a few drops of olive oil in it and a little bit of solvent, and you burnish the surface with the same thing. And polish it. You use the olive oil to lubricate the surface, and the solvent just dissolves the surface layer of the shellac and allows you to reflow it. It's very time consuming, and it only really works if you've done grain filling. If you haven't done grain filling, then you're going to be fighting a battle to do that. So that's not the way we're going to do it with this case. So the body here, this has had 6 coats, I think. It's had a good couple of days to dry, and it's hard. I haven't touched it, but I'm going to show you what we do in a minute. The neck and so on. Oh, that was the other thing. I decided to veneer the headstock to match the spalted maple on the body, and so that was one of the jobs I did after the dry build. All of this has had the same number of coats. It was done at the same time, and what I've done is I've sanded this. I've used some micro mesh, 1800 in this case. Wrap it around a block. Always wrap it around a block. Reason being, if you sand with your fingers on the back there and you sand that way, what you'll actually do is make 3 grooves where your fingers are. If you sand that way, it's a little better, but it's not perfect. You'll often find when you get to the any curved bits, you'll need to sand with your fingers, but if you've got large flat areas, use a block. The other reason is that there's an inevitability to sanding by hand that you'll sand the edges more severely than you will the middle. If you look over a piece of board, a flat board which you've sanded, almost always you'll look at it and you'll see that the middle isn't sanded properly and the edges have sanded through. If you use a block, you'll save yourself from doing that. Also, it can be difficult to get up into little bits, and just here, I'm looking at this, I very much doubt you can see it, but where I've started sanding this, it's got that nice flat and smooth feeling, but along these edges here, I can still see the unsanded coating. So I'm just going to give that a little sand, and I'm using the block again. I know it's a flat surface, so if I use this, I should be able to sand right up to the edge and get rid of that rough feeling that's there, which I have. Where I can't do it is where the veneer has just rolled around on the corner, so I'm going to very gently, and I mean really very gently, just touch that just to key the surface. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my hand. My hand is a brilliant tool for detecting how smooth the surface is after you've sanded it. If you rub your fingers over it, you'll feel any blemishes. Feel the edges. You'll feel whether or not there's any more sanding needed. I can feel just in that neck there, it needs a little bit. Not much, just a little bit. So you feel all the way over the surfaces, and you'll feel whether or not you need to sand some more. Just being careful not to break through, because you spent a lot of time putting it on. You don't want to take it all off with the sandpaper. So I'm happy with that. I've already sanded the neck itself and the bottom of the neck there. So that is ready to put the next coat on. This I haven't touched. I'm not going to do it all right now, but I am going to just show you basically how I go about it. Now I'm just going to start up here. And I'm going to work my way. Not following the grain or anything like that. At this stage, you're not sanding the wood, you're sanding the shellac. So you can ignore the grain. As I do this, I'm starting to see, I've got a window here behind the camera, and I've got the reflection of the window. I can see the reflection of the window, and I can see how the surface is changing. I can see where I'm taking it off. As I say, because I'm using a block, I should be safe not to break through at the edges, and I should make sure that the effort I'm putting into sanding around the edges is the same as the effort that goes in the middle. So that's going to take me, the whole thing's probably going to take me an hour or so to sand and bring it all the way back to a flat surface ready to take the final coating of shellac. So I'm going to put that aside and show you the process of doing the shellac. As I say, mix up your shellac flakes with methylated spirit, make yourself a jar of shellac, French polish, make yourself a bit of cotton, well washed cotton wool balls in there, just works as a bit of a sponge. Dip, wipe, because it's not been used overnight, and just make sure it's soaked in and softened up, because that's the other thing, it does tend to harden up a bit, but the fresh shellac, French polish, is going to soften up the pad like that. And I'm going to start on the face here. I'm just going to wipe it on. First coat often feels quite sticky. I'm building up a layer. That first coat softens up the shellac that's underneath, but of course makes it sticky, so it takes a few moments to get it to flow. But once it's flowing, that's fine. And then we're going to work our way around all the edges. Now I don't actually want, on the back of the neck and the headstock, I don't actually want a high finish. I don't want a high gloss finish. And so we're going to put this on relatively thin. I'm just using the room lights to help me see that I've covered it properly. Make sure you haven't got any runs around the edges. does go off very quickly. It will go sticky really quickly while you work. Just going to grab a block to put underneath there so that doesn't touch. And now we're going to do the neck. And because you don't want any dry edges, it's really good to try and just work the whole thing in one hit. It just so happens that when we screw this neck onto the body, this part of the neck is going to show. So don't forget to coat that as well. And that is it. Don't know how much of that shine you can see on there. That is it. And it's really not going to need much more than that. When it's dry, we'll have another look at it. But I'm hopeful that that'll be all we need to do. Oh, you will get it all over your fingers if you don't wear gloves. And if you get it all over your fingers, it's amazing stuff. It will stay stuck to your fingers for a couple of days, even though you're flexing. And that's actually why it's great stuff to use on your guitar body, because it moves with the wood. It's a natural material. As the moisture content of the wood changes, as you put stresses into the guitar, it's not going to crack or anything like that. It's going to stay looking beautiful. And if it does get damaged at any point, it's really easy to repair. You just get your shellac out and redo it. So that's it. That's all we're going to do for today. I'm going to go away and sand the body and recoat that as well. Once I've finished sanding the back of the body and recoated that, and it's had a day or two to dry, I'm then going to flip it over and I'm going to do the face of the guitar, which will be the last part. I haven't touched that yet. That's it. If you enjoyed this video and you want to keep up to date with what's going on, then don't forget to subscribe and like and comment, hit that little bell icon, etc. And I'll put notes about where the kit came from and so on in the notes underneath. That's it from me. I'm Stephen Spencer, Suffolk Craftsman. We'll speak to you soon.